The Galactic Council sent a fleet. Only static came back. The call came at 3:14 in the morning, and I knew from the sound of it that something had already gone wrong. Not the ringtone, not the hour. It was the silence underneath it. That particular silence that lives between a transmission being sent and the truth finally arriving. I had spent 14 years as a xenolinguist on the Seoul observation post, and I had learned to read silences the way other people read words. I sat up from my cot, pressed the receiver to my ear, and listened. The voice on the other end belonged to my supervisor, a mild and careful man named George Alderton, who had never called me before sunrise in all the years I had worked under him. He said 3 things. He said the Council's sovereignty fleet had gone dark. He said the Kandri Expanse was the last known location. And then he said my name the way people say a name when they are not sure the person on the other end is going to be okay. "Mara," he said, "you need to come in now." I was already pulling on my jacket. The observation post sat at the far edge of the Seoul exclusion zone, which was the Galactic Council's polite name for the cage they had built around our solar system 230 years ago. They had called it a containment protocol. They had called it a precautionary measure. They had dressed it in the language of diplomacy and concern, but the truth was simple. The Council was afraid of us. Not afraid the way you are afraid of something powerful, afraid the way you are afraid of something unpredictable. We were listed in the Galactic Registry as a Category 7 volatile species. The official definition of Category 7 was a civilization demonstrating elevated risk indicators including rapid technological escalation, cross-cultural conflict patterns, and unsanctioned interstellar curiosity. Unsanctioned interstellar curiosity. That one always made me laugh. They had found a way to make reaching for the stars sound like a crime. The post was a long gray corridor of a building, shaped like a needle and bolted to an asteroid at the edge of our system. Most of the staff were human. A few council-appointed observers rotated through on 2-year assignments, clicking their mandibles when they thought we were not listening, filing reports that nobody ever showed us. I had read one once, accidentally. It described humanity as persistently unreasonable in their enthusiasm. I had framed the phrase in my mind and hung it somewhere I could see it often. When I arrived at the operations room, the lights were already at full brightness, and 6 people were standing around the central display, saying nothing. That was the thing that told me everything. Not the faces, not the body language. The silence. 6 people who argued about coffee and shift schedules every single day, standing perfectly still. The display showed a star map. The Kandri Expanse was marked in pale yellow at the far end of the arm, a region about 40 light-years across that had always been notable for one reason: almost nothing was there. No inhabited worlds, no council stations, no known civilization, just cold hydrogen clouds and the occasional rogue asteroid and, as of 11 years ago, one missing human probe. I did not say anything about the probe, not yet. George walked over to me with a data pad and spoke quietly, the way people speak when they are trying not to alarm the room. 40 warships, he said. The full sovereignty fleet under Admiral Council Rank Kreth. They were dispatched 6 days ago in response to an anomalous signal originating from the Kandri Expanse. Standard suppression protocol. We were not informed until they were already en route. Of course we weren't, I said. They made contact with Council Relay Station 7 Alpha at 1900 hours 3 days ago. Routine check-in, nothing unusual. He paused. 14 hours ago, Relay Station 7 Alpha stopped receiving. We have been attempting contact on every frequency since then. All we get is static, I said. He looked at me. How did you know? I had not known. Not exactly. But I had felt it, the way you feel the shape of a word in a language you are still learning. I told him it was a guess and looked back at the display. 40 ships, the best the council had, gone quiet in 14 hours. I pulled up a chair, sat down in front of the secondary console, and opened my personal archive. Nobody noticed. Everyone else was watching the main display, waiting for something to change. I searched for the file I had not opened in 3 years. Sleeper 7. Designation: Unsanctioned Long-Range Contact Probe. Launched covertly 11 years ago by a team of independent researchers at a university in Edinburgh who had, with extraordinary cleverness and very limited funding, managed to build a probe the size of a small car, load it with the most complete record of human existence ever assembled, and fire it toward the Candry expanse before the Council even knew it had left the ground. The team had been fined heavily. 2 of them had faced legal proceedings. The probe had been declared lost after 18 months with no signal. I had been one of the people who helped design the linguistic package. I had been 26 years old. I had thought it was the most important thing I would ever do. The package included 17,000 human languages with full grammatical annotation. It included mathematics from basic arithmetic to quantum field equations. It included music from every continent across 4 centuries. It included literature, painting, film, and architecture. It included our medical history, our agricultural history, and our history of conflict, because we had decided, after long argument, that honesty mattered more than a good impression. We sent everything, the beautiful parts and the difficult parts and the parts we were still trying to fix. We sent it all into the dark and waited. Nothing came back. And then, 11 years later, 40 Council warships went to the same coordinates and turned into static. I sat with that for a long moment. George was standing next to me again. I had not heard him approach. He was looking at my screen. He could see the file clearly. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Mara," he said. "I know," I said. "You need to tell me what you know." I turned in my chair and looked at him. George Alderton was a careful man and a fair one. He had spent 30 years as a bureaucrat on the edge of the solar system, managing a posting that most people in Earth's government considered a comfortable form of exile. He was not dramatic. He was not excitable. And right now, he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, which was the expression of a man who has just realized that the ground under his feet is not as solid as he thought. "I think found something," I said. "You think it found something 11 years ago, and nobody knew. Nobody was listening on the right frequencies." He was quiet for a moment. "And you think the Council fleet went there because of whatever found?" "I think the Council fleet went there because their sensors picked up an anomaly. And I think the anomaly is the same thing Sleeper 7 found. And I think whatever it is, it wasn't happy about 40 warships showing up without an introduction." George stared at the yellow region on the star map for a very long time. Then he picked up his communicator and called the Council liaison desk. I stayed at my console and pulled up the static. The recording that Relay Station 7 Alpha had been sending on repeat for the past 14 hours, the last thing it had received before it too fell silent. Everyone else in the room thought it was noise, interference, the death rattle of a failed transmission from a destroyed fleet. I put on my headset and listened. And after about 4 minutes, I stopped breathing. Because it was not random. The static was not random at all. It had structure. It had rhythm. It had something that my trained ear recognized the way you recognize your own name spoken by a stranger in a crowd. It was language. It was a form of language, shaped around mathematics, built on a framework that looked very much like the same mathematical framework that the team in Edinburgh had used as the foundation for Sleeper 7's contact package. It was not a distress signal from a destroyed fleet. It was a reply. I sat in that room, in that long gray needle of a building, bolted to an asteroid at the edge of the solar system, while everyone around me stared at a star map and worried about 40 missing warships. And I understood, with the absolute cold clarity of a person who has just seen exactly how large the universe really is, That something out there in the Kandri expanse had waited 11 years, patient as a planet, for someone to say hello. And then the wrong people had shown up first. I pulled off my headset. I set it down carefully on the console. George was already walking back toward me, his face pale, his communicator in his hand. "The council is calling an emergency session," he said. "They want every piece of data we have on Kandri Expanse activity, all of it. And Mara," he stopped. He looked at me the way people look at someone they are about to put in a difficult position. "They are specifically requesting the human xenolinguist assigned to this post." I had never been specifically requested by the Galactic Council in my life. "When?" I asked. "The shuttle is already prepped." I looked back at the screen, at the waveform of the static, rolling quietly across the display, full of words that no one in that council chamber would know how to hear. "Give me 20 minutes, I said. I needed to copy the files. All of them. Sleeper 7 had been carrying a secret for 11 years, and I was not about to let the council be the ones to open it. The shuttle was cold and fast and smelled like recycled air and dread. I sat with my data pad on my knee the whole way, working through the static recording with a pair of noise-canceling headphones and a signal processing program I had written myself 3 years ago for a different project that had never gone anywhere. It was going somewhere now. By the time the council station appeared in the viewport, enormous and gleaming and shaped like something that had never once considered human comfort in its design, I had confirmed what I already knew. The static was structured, the static was addressed, and the address was not in any council language. It was in English. Old English, Middle English, Portuguese, Mandarin, Yoruba, Arabic, Hindi, and about 40 other languages layered on top of each other in a harmonic pattern that should not have been possible through audio transmission but somehow was. It was every language in Sleeper 7's linguistic package, all at once, woven together into a single message. And the message was one word. Hello. I sat back in my seat. I looked out the viewport at the council station getting larger and larger as we approached. I thought about 40 warships turned to static. I thought about a small probe built by exhausted researchers in a Scottish university on a shoestring budget. I thought about the linguistic package I had spent 6 months of my life designing. And I thought we said hello first. Even locked in our cage, even classified as volatile and dangerous and unreasonably enthusiastic, even fined and prosecuted and excluded from everything the rest of the galaxy was doing, we had still found a way to say hello. And something had said it back. The shuttle docked. The airlock hissed. A council official in formal gray was waiting on the other side with the expression of someone who has had a very bad 2 weeks. I tucked my data pad under my arm and walked through. Whatever came next, humanity had already done the most important thing. We had knocked. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council Emergency Chamber was built for intimidation. The ceiling was 50 meters high. The walls were lined with the flags of 217 member civilizations. The council seats were arranged in a descending arc, and at the center of the arc, alone at a small table that looked like it had been deliberately chosen to emphasize smallness, was the chair where I was told to sit. I sat in it. Above me, 217 species looked down. At the apex of the arc, Councillor Dravathi of the Keth, a tall, silver-skinned being with 4 arms and the particular stillness of someone who had been making decisions about lesser civilizations for 300 years, looked at me with an expression that did not quite reach contempt, but was getting close. "Dr. Voss," Dravathi said, and the translation earpiece in my right ear rendered his voice into flat, careful English. "We have been told you possess data relevant to the Kandri anomaly." "I do," I said. "We have also been told that this data relates to an unsanctioned human incursion into deep space conducted 11 years ago. I had expected this. The probe was unarmed, I said. It carried a contact package, linguistic and mathematical in nature, a greeting. The sound that moved through the chamber was not quite a gasp. It was more like the collective intake of breath from 217 species, all realizing something at the same moment. A greeting, Dravathi repeated. Yes. You sent a greeting to an unclassified region of deep space, without council authorization, without safety assessment, without any knowledge of what you might be contacting. We had a hypothesis, I said, and we were right. Dravathi's 4 hands moved in a pattern I had learned to recognize from years of watching Keth diplomats. It meant something close to, I am choosing not to say what I am actually thinking. Dr. Voss, he said, 40 council warships are currently unresponsive. 12,000 crew members are missing. An entire sovereignty fleet has gone dark in a region of space that, as you apparently knew and did not report, had already been contacted by your species without authorization. And you are sitting there telling me that this is because you sent a greeting. I'm telling you that the static is not random, I said. I opened my data pad and projected the waveform onto the chamber's central display. This is the signal being broadcast from the Kandri expanse on all frequencies for the past 14 hours. Every analyst on your team has been reading it as interference. It isn't. Silence. I let the waveform sit there for a moment, rolling across the massive display in the center of the chamber, visible to every species in the arc above me. Then I reached into my data pad, pulled up the linguistic framework from Sleeper 7's contact package, and overlaid it on the waveform. The patterns lined up perfectly. I heard the sound again, the collective breath, louder this time. That, I said, pointing at the overlay on the display, is a structured signal. It is built on the same mathematical and linguistic framework that the Sleeper 7 probe carried into the Kandri expanse 11 years ago. It is not noise. It is not interference. It is a response. Whatever is in the Kandri expanse learned our framework from Sleeper 7 and is using it to communicate. I paused. I looked up at Dravathi. They are talking to us, I said, and specifically to us. Not to the council. The signal is addressed in human languages, only human languages. The silence after that was different from the silence before it. It was the silence of a room full of people who have just had to very quickly revise their understanding of a situation. Dravathi spoke first. What does the signal say? I looked down at my data pad. I had been reading and rereading the decoded message on the shuttle, turning it over and over, making sure I had it right. One word, I said, repeated on every frequency, in every language from Sleeper 7's package all at once. I looked back up. Hello, I said. Nobody in the chamber said anything for a very long time. And then, from somewhere in the upper arc, a delegate from a species I did not recognize said something in a language the earpiece could not immediately process. The earpiece tried twice, and then gave me a rough approximation. It came out as, they answered the humans. Dravathi's hands moved again. We will need time to verify. You don't have time, I said, and I surprised myself with how steady my voice was. Whatever is in the Kandri expanse is communicating right now. Every hour you spend verifying is an hour the signal sits unanswered. And I can tell you from professional experience that silence in the middle of a conversation carries its own message. Dravathi looked at me with those old, careful eyes. And what would you suggest we do, Dr. Voss? I looked at the waveform on the display, at the single word rolling through it in every human language, patient and clear and endlessly repeated. Answer, I said. The chamber broke into noise. Dozens of species all arguing at once, the translation earpiece struggling to keep up. A wall of diplomatic procedure and safety concerns, and precedent and protocol crashing down all at once like a wave hitting a shore. And underneath it all, quiet and steady as a heartbeat, the static kept rolling across the display. Hello. 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 Dravathi raised one hand and the chamber went quiet. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the display. Then he looked back at me. "This council will deliberate," he said. "You will be held in a secure observation room while we do so. You will not communicate with anyone outside this station. You will surrender your data pad." "No," I said. Every eye in the chamber turned to me. I said it again clearly without raising my voice. "No, I will not surrender my data pad because I am the only person in this building who can read that signal in real time, and if it changes, and it will change, because signals during active communication always change, you will need me to tell you what it says. So I will keep my data pad, I will sit in your observation room, and you will deliberate as quickly as you can." Another long silence. Then slowly, Dravathi nodded. I was escorted out of the chamber by 2 council security officers who were polite about it, which told me more than any speech could have about how seriously the council was now taking the situation. They put me in a room with a chair and a table, and a window that looked out at the stars. I sat down, I opened my data pad, and I started drafting a reply. Not on behalf of the council. On behalf of the species that had sent the first message. The observation room had 1 light, 1 chair, 1 table, and a window that showed nothing but stars. There was a tray of food delivered by a mechanical arm through a slot in the door. The food was technically edible. I did not eat it. I was too busy writing. When I work on a translation problem, I go quiet. Not just on the outside, I go quiet on the inside too. The whole world narrows down to the structure of the language in front of me, the patterns beneath the patterns, the logic that holds it all together. My mother used to say I looked like I had left the room even when I was sitting right in front of her. She was not wrong. I had been in that state for about 6 hours when George Alderton's voice came through the small speaker above the door. "Myra." I looked up. "The council has been deliberating for 4 hours," he said. "I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but they are leaning toward a decision to seal the Kandri expanse. No further contact, no response to the signal, a permanent quarantine order." I set down my stylus. "They are going to ignore it," I said. "They are going to manage it. That is how they phrase it." A pause. "They are also discussing reclassifying Earth's category status in light of the Sleeper 7 incident, upward, which would mean additional restrictions on." "George." "Yes." "How long do I have before they come for the data pad?" A longer pause, probably 2 hours, maybe less. I looked at my data pad. I looked at the draft I had been building for 6 hours. I looked at the stars in the window. There is a frequency built into every observation post and every human deep space installation in the Soul Exclusion Zone. It is a distress frequency, technically. It is for emergencies only. It was designed so that human ships in trouble could call for help when council channels were unavailable. It was legally sanctioned, which meant it was one of the very few frequencies in this part of the galaxy that could not be jammed by council relay stations without triggering an automatic diplomatic incident. I had known about it for years. I had never used it. I looked at my reply one more time. It was not long. I had kept it deliberately simple, because clarity matters more than eloquence when you are speaking across an incomprehensible distance to something that learned your language from a time capsule shot into space by sleep-deprived researchers in Scotland 11 years ago. It said, "We are still here. We have always been here." 6 words, layered into the same harmonic structure that Sleeper 7 had used. Mathematical foundation first, then linguistics, Then the emotional resonance patterns I had theorized about in my doctoral thesis and had been told were too abstract to be practically applicable. My doctoral committee had been wrong about that. I opened the emergency frequency application on my data pad. It had a big red confirmation button and 3 warning messages that I dismissed one by one. Then I sat there for a moment. I thought about the team in Edinburgh. I thought about the arguments over the contact package, the late nights, the moment when we had all agreed to include the difficult parts of human history because honesty was more important than a good impression. I thought about firing that little probe into the dark with nothing but hope attached to it. I thought about how the council had laughed, not loudly. They were too careful for that, but in the small, precise ways that powerful institutions laugh at things they do not take seriously. And then I pressed the button. The transmission took 4 seconds to send. It was fast and clean and completely unauthorized, and the moment it left the station, every alarm on the council's communication network lit up like sunrise. I sat back in my chair. I set my data pad on the table. They came through the door about 90 seconds later. 4 security officers, a council communications officer, and George, who was behind them all and was looking at me with an expression that mixed exasperation and something very close to pride. The communications officer looked at the data pad on the table. She looked at me. "You sent an unsanctioned transmission on a restricted emergency frequency." "I sent a reply," I said. "On behalf of whom?" I looked at her calmly. "On behalf of the species that started the conversation." They took the data pad. They escorted me to a different room, this one with no window. George was allowed in briefly, long enough to tell me that the council was now in full emergency session, that Councillor Dravathi had used the words unprecedented and dangerous and irresponsible in the same sentence, and that my transmission had gone out clean on all monitored frequencies. "Did it reach the Candria expanse?" I asked. "At the speed of light," he said, "not for another 40 years. I nodded. I had known that. "But it's on record," he said. "Every relay station in the arm picked it up, every council monitoring post, every independent deep space array. It's out there. They can't unsend it." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. "Good," I said. The hearing was convened within the hour. Not the careful, deliberate kind of hearing the council usually preferred, with weeks of preparation and formal documentation and procedural courtesy. This was the fast, sharp kind of hearing that happens when an institution has been caught off guard and needs to establish control quickly. They brought me back to the great chamber. The same 50-meter ceiling, the same 217 flags, the same descending arc of seats. But the atmosphere was different. Before, there had been the gravity of a serious situation. Now there was something edgier, a crackle in the air that reminded me of the moment before a thunderstorm. Councillor Dravathi did not wait for me to sit down. "You transmitted an unsanctioned message on an emergency frequency designated for distress calls only," he said. "You did so while under explicit instruction to surrender your communications equipment. You did so on behalf of your species without any diplomatic authority, and you did so at a moment when this council was actively deliberating on the appropriate course of action." He paused. "Do you have anything to say?" It was not phrased as a question, but I answered it like one. "I have a question," I said. Dravathi waited. "How many of the species in this chamber responded to the respondent's signals in their early history?" The chamber went very still. "That is not relevant to." "How many?" I said again. A longer silence. Dravathi's 4 hands were very still. "That information is not part of these proceedings." "So you do know about the signals," I said. "You have records, At some point in the history of Council member species, the same entity that is currently broadcasting from the Kandri expanse made contact with civilizations that are now sitting in those seats. I looked up at the arc above me, and not one of them replied. Nobody said anything. Found something out there 11 years ago, I said. And that something has been sitting in the Kandri expanse since then, patient as stone, waiting. It did not attack the probe. It did not ignore the probe. It learned from it. It spent 11 years building the capacity to respond in our languages, on our frequencies, using our own frameworks. And then 40 Council warships showed up without a greeting and without a plan, and it had to deal with that situation in the only way available to it. It destroyed those ships, Dravathi said. I don't think it destroyed them, I said. Another silence, different from the ones before. The static, I said. You have all been reading the static as the destruction of a fleet, noise, the remnants of a catastrophic signal failure. I read it as structured communication, but there is a third possibility. I looked at the display, where the waveform was still visible from my earlier presentation, still rolling quietly across the screen. What if the fleet is still in the static? Nobody moved. What if it translated them? I said. Not destroyed, translated. The way you take information in one format and convert it into another. The ships, the crew, all of it transformed into signal, into data, into the only kind of language it knows how to speak. And when it learned from Sleeper 7 how to speak our language, when it finally had a framework to work with, it started trying to send them back. Dravathi looked at me for a very long time. And then something happened that I had never seen in my 14 years on the observation post, and that I had been told by everyone who knew about Council protocol that I would never see. Councillor Dravathi looked uncertain. It lasted only a moment. Then the chamber erupted, 217 species all arguing at once, and I stood in the center of it, at the small table in the small chair, in the enormous room built for intimidation, and waited. And then every communications array in the chamber went silent. Not gradually, not one by one, all at once. In a single, coordinated moment of total quiet, every speaker, every display, every monitoring system on the station cut off. And then they came back on. All of them, simultaneously, broadcasting the same signal on every frequency. The static, but different now, richer, more complex, woven through with something that my ear caught immediately because I had been listening for it and training my perception on it for the past 16 hours. It was addressing someone. I stepped forward to the console and pulled up the signal analysis tool. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that in a distant kind of way. I had expected them to shake. The signal was addressed in human languages, all 47 from the core package. But this time there was more underneath the structure, something I had not seen in the original static. A kind of depth, like looking through glass into water and realizing the water is very deep. I put on the headset from the console and listened. And I understood. I understood with the absolute, crystalline clarity of a person hearing something true for the first time, even though they have been waiting for it without knowing that they were waiting. I took off the headset. The chamber was completely silent, 217 species, all watching me. Councillor Dravathi said very quietly, "What does it say?" I looked at the display. I looked at the waveform. I looked at the signal that had been broadcast from the Kandri expanse, that had silenced 40 warships and worried an entire galactic council and kept me awake for the longest night of my life. It says several things, I said, but the first thing, the thing it leads with, is information about the fleet. The crew, Dravathi said, his voice had changed. Are they alive? I said. All of them, 12,000 people. It is telling us how to bring them back. I looked at the console. It is telling us exactly what frequency to broadcast on and exactly what mathematical sequence to transmit, and it says that when we do that, the signal carrying the fleet will resolve back into physical form. It says it will take 48 hours. The sound that went through the chamber then was unlike anything I had ever heard in a room full of people. It was relief and fear and wonder and something else, something that did not have a clean name but felt like the moment before the first breath after a long time underwater. Dravathi said, "And the second thing." I looked at my notes. I read slowly. The second thing it says is this: it has been in the Kandri expanse for a very long time. It has watched many civilizations develop, including every species currently represented in this chamber. It has broadcast signals to many of those civilizations over the course of their histories. It has waited each time for a response. I paused. I looked up at the arc of seats above me. None of the current council member species responded. Most ignored the signals. Some incorporated them into religious traditions. Some detected them and chose not to investigate. The silence in the chamber was absolute. And then, I said, 11 years ago, a small probe arrived in the Kandri expanse carrying the entire recorded existence of a species that the Galactic Council had classified as dangerous, volatile, and not suitable for full membership. I took a breath. And the probe said hello. And it waited. And then 6 hours ago, that same species from inside a containment zone under diplomatic restrictions, in violation of several council communications protocols, sent a follow-up message. 6 words: "We are still here. We have always been here." I set my notes down on the console. The third thing the signal says, I said, is addressed directly to the Council, not to Earth, to the Council. Dravatha's hands were completely still. It says, "The ones who locked the curious ones away, you will be heard, but you will not be first." I let that sit for a moment. The chamber stayed quiet. I added, "I did not write that. That is a direct translation of the signal. Every linguistic parameter I have checked confirms the reading." Somewhere in the upper arc, a delegate said something. The earpiece rendered it slowly. It came out as, "What does first mean? First for what?" I thought about Sleeper 7. I thought about the contact package. I thought about all the things we had included, the music and the mathematics and the history and the honest accounting of our failures alongside our achievements. "I think," I said carefully, "that first means exactly what it sounds like. First to talk, first to listen, first to be part of whatever conversation comes next." Counselor Dravathi looked at me for a long time. I could not read his expression with confidence. I had never been good at Keth faces, but I thought there was something in it that was not entirely contempt. "And what," he said, "does humanity intend to do with that?" I had not slept in 22 hours. I was wearing the same clothes I had pulled on at 3:14 in the morning when George Alderton called me. I was standing in front of 217 species in a room built to make me feel small. I said, "Talk." That was all, just that one word. And then the chamber broke into noise again, and the signal from the Kandri expanse kept rolling across every display on every frequency, patient and enormous and endlessly, quietly present, like something that had been waiting for a very long time and was not in any hurry now. It took the Council 48 hours to follow the instructions in the signal. 48 hours of deliberation and verification and careful cross-checking, and the particular kind of institutional caution that comes from being an organization responsible for 217 civilizations. I sat in the observation room with the window and waited. On the 47th hour, I watched from the window as a broadcast went out from the station on the precise frequency, and in the precise mathematical sequence that the signal had specified. 1 hour later, the 12,000 crew members of the Sovereignty Fleet came home. They arrived at Earth's orbit, not the Council station, not a neutral location, Earth. The fleet reassembled piece by piece in the space above our planet, ships first, then interiors, then life support, Then people, all of it unfolding like a message being decoded in reverse, like a translation resolving back into its original language. It took about 6 hours, and the entire thing was captured on every monitoring array in the solar system. I watched the recordings later. My hands were shaking by then. Finally, delayed reaction. The crew emerged disoriented but unharmed. Every single one of them. 12,000 people from dozens of species, all returned exactly as they had been, with one difference. Every crew member remembered something. Not like a dream and not like a memory exactly. More like knowing. Like looking at a familiar door and suddenly understanding, without having been told, what was on the other side. The doctors who examined them in the hours after described it differently depending on which crew member they spoke to. But the common thread, the thing that came up in every account from every species, was this: they had been somewhere. Not nowhere, not in suspension or storage or simple signal form. Somewhere. And that somewhere had been very old and very large and very peaceful, and they had been shown things. Mathematical things, mostly. Structures of physics that our best researchers spent the next year trying to interpret. Medical knowledge that solved, quietly and completely. 3 diseases that had been resistant to every council treatment for centuries. Agricultural techniques that were so simple and so effective that a 14-year-old on a farming station in orbit understood them immediately and implemented them before the official report was even written. And one more thing, the crew members all mentioned it, every species, every rank, every background. They had all heard music. Human music, the selections from Sleeper 7's package, all of it playing somewhere underneath the knowing, like a theme underneath a film, like a name underneath a sentence. I sat with that for a long time when I first read the reports. They heard our music, across 40 light years, across 11 years of waiting, across the translation into signal and back. Whatever had been in the Kandri expanse had held onto the music, had kept it close to whatever it used for a self. That tells you something. I am not sure I have the words for what it tells you, but it tells you something. The council spent 3 months in closed emergency sessions. I know what was discussed in some of those sessions because George told me, carefully and in pieces, speaking quietly in the break room when nobody else was around. The council debated Earth's category status. They debated the legal implications of the Sleeper 7 incident. They debated what the respondents' communications meant for the galactic order and the council's place in it and the future of interstellar diplomacy. They also, and this was the part George told me last, debated me. Specifically, what to do with a human xenolinguist who had sent an unsanctioned transmission on an emergency frequency while under instruction to surrender her communications equipment, who had translated a signal that had upended 12,000 years of council protocol, and who had done it all without raising her voice once. They decided in the end to drop all charges. George delivered the news in person. He flew to the post, which he never did, and knocked on my office door, which he also never did, and sat down in the chair across from my desk with a data pad in his hands and a look on his face that I recognized as the look of a man who is about to say something that matters. "They're dropping it," he said. "All of it?" I asked. "All of it, the communications violation, the unauthorized transmission, the Sleeper 7 involvement, all of it." He set the data pad down on the desk. "There is also a formal notification from the Council Registry. Earth's category designation is being revised." "Upward," I said. I had expected that. Additional restrictions, George had warned me months ago. "Downward," he said. I looked at him. "Category 7 volatile has been struck from the registry entirely," he said. "Not revised, removed. The Council has created a new classification. It does not have a clean English translation yet, but the closest approximation is," he looked at the data pad, "acknowledged correspondent." He looked up. "It has never been applied to any civilization before. The Council says it will take at least a year to define the diplomatic parameters. Earth will have to negotiate the terms directly with Council representatives. A pause. They are suggesting that you lead the negotiation. I sat at my desk in my small office at the edge of the solar system and said nothing for quite a while. Outside the window, the stars were doing what stars always do. They were being enormous and indifferent and beautiful, and completely unconcerned with anything happening in my office. They had been doing it for billions of years before humanity arrived, and they would be doing it for billions of years after. And somewhere out there in the Kandri expanse, something very old and very large was listening to our music and waiting to see what we would say next. "George," I said. "Yes." "Who approved Sleeper 8? He was quiet for a moment. "What?" "Sleeper 8, the team in Bristol. They submitted a proposal 14 months ago for a second long-range contact probe. Same basic architecture as Sleeper 7, updated linguistic package, improved power systems. The Council Review Board rejected it on procedural grounds." George looked at me. "Mara, the Council Review Board is now going to have a very complicated relationship with procedural grounds," I said. "And the team in Bristol has been waiting for 14 months. A long pause. George picked up his data pad. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at me. "I will make some calls," he said. He left. I turned to my window. The stars outside were the same stars they had always been. The same light, the same distances, the same vast and wordless dark between them. But the dark felt different now. It had felt different since the morning George called me at 3:14 and said the fleet had gone quiet. It felt inhabited, not frightening, just inhabited. The way a room feels different when you know someone is in it, even if you cannot see them yet. Something was out there, something patient and ancient and curious, that had seeded life across the galaxy and watched it grow and waited for any civilization that would reach toward it, not with weapons or fear or the machinery of power, but with the simple, irrepressible human impulse to say, "Hello, we are here. We thought you might want to know." I thought about the team in Edinburgh, years ago, working through the nights on a probe most people thought was a waste of time. I thought about the arguments over what to include and what to leave out, and how we had eventually agreed that the honest version of humanity was better than the polished one, because whatever was out there deserved to know what we actually were. I thought about Counselor Dravathi calling us volatile, calling our curiosity unsanctioned, sitting in his enormous chamber above his enormous flag and looking down at the small chair where the humans sat. I thought about all of that, and then I opened a new document on my data pad. At the top I typed, "Linguistic Framework Proposal Sleeper 8 Contact Package, Revision 1. I started writing. I wrote for a long time, through the rest of that afternoon and into the evening, and past the point where the light outside the window changed from the pale artificial light of the station to the darker shade that passed for night at the edge of the solar system. I wrote about language. I wrote about the way meaning survives translation if the structure underneath it is honest and clear. I wrote about mathematics as a foundation and music as an emotional carrier, and the way those two things together could say things that neither could say alone. I wrote about what we had learned from the respondent's signal, the depth in it, the patience, the particular quality of something that has been waiting for a very long time and has finally, at last, been given reason to stop waiting. I wrote a note at the end, just for myself, not for the proposal, a reminder. It said, "The Council called us volatile because we reach toward things we do not understand. They considered that a flaw. Turns out it was the whole point." 3 weeks later, George sent me a message. 2 sentences. It said, "Bristol team approved. Launch window 6 months." I read it 3 times and then I walked down to the post's small common room, where 4 of my colleagues were having an argument about the coffee machine, which had been broken for 2 months and was apparently a source of genuine diplomatic tension on the human side of the station. I interrupted the argument, which was unusual enough that everyone stopped and looked at me. "Buy good coffee," I said. "We are about to have a lot of meetings." They stared at me. "Earth," I said, "is going to need translators." 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in late spring, I watched from the observation post window as Sleeper 8 launched from a coastal facility in England. It was smaller than I expected, watching on the live feed. These things always are. It looked fragile against the size of the sky. A small bright point moving upward and then outward and then gone, swallowed by the dark in the time it takes to breathe. It was carrying everything we knew. The updated package had taken 8 months to build. 243 people from 61 countries, working across 37 languages, had contributed to it. It included everything had carried, updated, and expanded, plus 3 years of new music and new mathematics and new discoveries. It included the recordings of what had happened in the Kandri expanse. It included the analysis of the respondent's signal. It included everything we had learned from the 12,000 crew members, who came home carrying knowledge they had not had before. It also included, at my specific request, the original Sleeper 7 contact package, unchanged. Exactly as the Edinburgh team had built it all those years ago, because that was the thing that had worked. That was the thing that had crossed the distance and found something on the other side and been heard. And at the very beginning of the package, before the mathematics and before the music and before the languages and the history and the careful, honest accounting of who and what we were, at the very beginning, in every language we knew, in the same harmonic structure the respondent had used when it reached back across the dark to find us, was one word. Hello. I watched Sleeper 8 disappear into the sky, and I thought, we do not wait to be let in. I thought we knock. I thought about the council chamber, and the small chair, and the 50-meter ceiling and counselor, Dravatha's hands moving in the pattern that meant I am choosing not to say what I am actually thinking. I thought about the static, rolling across every display on every frequency, patient as weather, carrying 12,000 people home wrapped in a word that my species had put in a bottle, and sent into the sea 11 years ago on a clear night in Scotland with a team of exhausted researchers and a budget that would not have covered a decent lunch. I thought we are still here. We have always been here. The sky was very blue. The probe was gone. Somewhere ahead of it, 40 light-years out and getting no closer for a very long time, something ancient and large and patient was holding our music and listening. And we were talking. For the first time in 230 years, humanity was talking. I put my hand against the window. The glass was cold against my palm. "Get ready," I said quietly, to the stars, to the dark between them, to whatever was listening from the Kandri expanse, and from every other corner of a galaxy that was much less empty than anyone had ever let us believe. We were here. We had always been here. And we were just getting started.